All right, so I am recording this. This is, Sharon, do you still put this up on your, you can? Okay. All right, just want to make sure people know that it is being recorded. So if there are any concerns or comfort, just let us know in the chat. So right now I'm going to share my screen with you. It's going to take me a second just to get it set up. And there we go. All right, so I'm just going to move things over. The one thing I can't see is the chat. So Sharon, if there is a question in there, if you could just let me know, I'd appreciate it. Everyone else, for the time being, if you guys could mute your microphones just to make sure that we don't have any kind of distraction or something like that. All right, so my name is Mindy Lampert. I am the Senior Academic Specialist for C2 Education. We are a tutoring and college counseling service with 170 locations nationwide, 10 on Long Island, and we do both virtual and in-person tutoring, college counseling, etc. I've been with C2 for about 6 years now, and I've done everything from actually running a center for C2 to tutoring to coaching others tutors, as well as doing these educational programs at various libraries and other entities around Long Island. So I'm really happy to be here today. We've got a long agenda, as I said. We're going to talk a little bit about the role of college admissions tests. We're going to talk about some general test information. So specifically, we're definitely going to talk about the role of college admissions tests in the COVID era and what the future holds, because I know we have not only some 11th graders now, but we have some 8th graders as well. So you're really going to be concerned about 2023 and beyond. We're going to compare the two primary tests, the SAT and the ACT. And we're going to talk about which test to pick or whether you should take both tests. All right, so the role of college admissions tests. What do colleges look for? And why do we even have these tests available? Well, they're looking for consistency and efficiency. You all know in Syosset School District, you have to work really hard to earn a high grade. In many school districts, you may not have to work as hard. So how do colleges evaluate your grade of A with a grade of A at another school? It's what we call grade inflation. And then there are different grading scales. Some schools work out of a 4.0, some work out of a 5.0, some give extra weight if you take an AP or an honors class, some don't. So the SAT and the ACT gives us that consistent measure that can be used. It's also a way for college admissions counselors to evaluate and weed out applications. Harvard last year received 60,000 applications. That's huge. So how are they going to manage all these applications when they really don't have enough staff? Sometimes they use these tests to weed out candidates that may not be the best fit for the school. Right now, we know, starting with the pandemic, that there was a change in testing requirements. There were some schools before the pandemic that offered test optional, and we're going to talk about what test optional means. Right now, about 1/3 of four-year schools have resumed testing requirements. So for the most part, most schools went test optional for the graduating class of 2021, those students starting college right now. In 2022, 1/3 of them have resumed testing requirements. And even at test optional schools, we're going to see that the tests can definitely be of value. Are there any questions so far? Okay, then I'm going to continue. So this is a good screenshot if you want to take it. of what the SAT and ACT covers. Oops, I'm sorry, I didn't want to click that. I just wanted to change that. Okay. So the SAT is generally aligned to skills needed for college and career: critical thinking, grammar, writing, critical math skills. It's out of 1,600. They're the sum of the two subject scores. The math is out of 800, and the evidence-based reading and writing is out of 800. As of June 2021, the SAT has eliminated the essay. It is no longer offered at all. On the ACT is more in line with school curriculum. Each subject test is out of 36 points. So we have the math, the English, the reading, and the science. So there are 4 sections or 4 tests within the ACT. In the SAT, there are 2 because reading and writing are combined. There is still an essay. I'll touch on it briefly. And it is scored on the basis of 2 to 12. One key point with both of them, especially if you have test takers coming up or you have students who may have taken the test 2015 and before on the SAT side, there is no penalty for a wrong answer. So it always behooves the student to put down an answer. They have nothing to lose. The students have nothing to lose by putting down an answer and everything to gain. And I have had students who didn't get opportunity to read questions because they ran out of time, put down answers and get them right, even though they never had the opportunity to read the question. The SAT primarily focuses on fewer concepts, but more deeply. The ACT has more concepts, but less deeply. The SAT, a lot of questions about analysis, critical thinking. We'll see some examples of those. The ACT is a faster paced test, and I will show that to you. Generally, it's more straightforward, but in this month, the ACT has announced some significant changes that are making it move closer to the SAT. And we're going to get into that in a moment. This is a snapshot. Again, if you want to take a good screenshot of this, of the timing on the different sections. And you can see that the ACT is much faster paced. The overall length of the tests are about the same, but you have less time per question on the ACT than you do with the SAT. Now, for some students, and I'm not here to praise one over the other, it really is to demonstrate the differences so students can make decisions as to whether they should take both tests or they should focus on one test or the other. Another big distinction is here in the math section. You see where the pointer is, okay? The ACT, you can use a calculator on the entire section. On the SAT, there's a no calculator section and a section with a calculator. And we're going to see examples of some of these questions, but there are times when the calculator is of absolutely no value to helping you with these questions. The SAT is looking to see if you can translate carefully from word problems in English to the math, or they're looking for you to pick out, select a certain formula to solve a problem. The ACT at this point, and at least for the foreseeable future, is much more computational. And again, we'll see examples of that. Any questions so far? Okay, so what are some of the changes? And this is beginning right now. And as I said, the reading section is moving closer in style and content. So they are testing key ideas and details, explicit meaning, a specific detail from the passage, implicit meaning, meaning drawing a conclusion based on the information in the passage. We're also looking at craft and structure. How is the passage organized? Is it a claim and then the author gives 3 or 4 different examples to prove the claim? What is the relationship of a specific paragraph to the entire passage? And that accounts for 25 to 30% going forward. They're also looking at the integration of knowledge and ideas. So they're getting a little bit more into reasoning and how arguments are constructed. The ACT also may, going forward, add more charts and graphs into the reading, writing, and math sections. At this point, it is generally only in the actual science section. All right, so which do you prefer? At least initially, the SAT takes more time to solve each question, but right now the SAT still does require a little bit more careful thinking. The ACT gives less time, but the questions really, you have to really be able to move in rapid succession. Now, if you do qualify for extra time, this may also help shape your decision making. So if you do get more time, you may feel more comfortable with the ACT given the style and format of the questions. So keep that in mind as well. If you do have any questions about getting extended time, I will not have time to cover it today, but certainly you can message me in the chat and I'll be happy to chat with this or answer any questions at the end. Does anyone have any questions right now? All right, so superscoring. Superscoring means if you take several administrations of the test, the colleges will look at your best score in the reading and writing on the SAT side and your best score in the math, and they will use those scores. So let's just say you had a 600 on the reading and a 500 in the math. You took the test in August. You take the test in October and you have the opposite. You have the 600 in the reading and the 500 in the math. You will submit both administrations to the colleges and they will evaluate you with the 600 in math from August and the 600 in reading and writing from October. The ACT more recently, within the past year or so, started offering this option as well. So you will present all the scores and they will offer a super score, which you can send to the colleges. So what behooves you when you apply is to check with each individual college on their policy on this and make sure you are submitting the right information so that you can put yourself in the best light. Questions on superscoring? All right, so let's take a subject by subject deeper dive and let's look at the math. So the SAT, many of them are multi-step problem solving. So they'll ask you to translate from the math to the English. And after you do that, they may ask you to solve an equation given different variables. There is a use of geometry and concepts on reasoning on both. The calculator is permitted for only a portion of the test, and the skills do go up to pre-calculus. The ACT goes up to Algebra 2 and Trig, and again, you can use the calculator throughout. Many more questions that require computation. Another point that's not on here I do want to make, the SAT has 10 questions that are called grid-ins or student supplied response, meaning you have to solve the problem and then you have to grid in a numerical answer. The ACT is all multiple choice. So this is a little bit more detailed on the ACT. I've gone over a lot of this. Again, if you're specifically interested on the timing with just the maths by itself, you know, I definitely would urge you to take a screenshot of this particular slide. Okay. All right. So here's an idea of what I'm talking about with sample questions. So you can see on the left with the SAT, it's a word problem. The electric power in a circuit is equal to the square of the circuit's voltage divided by its resistance. And then they want you to plug in some numbers and get the voltage of the circuit. And then they even build on that on a second question where they're asking you to do additional calculations. And again, translate from the English to the math. Whereas on the right side, we have a strict algebraic calculation using absolute value and exponents. And the answer is there. So you can always take an educated guess if you're running short on time, etc. And again, in both cases, you have nothing to lose by putting down an answer. Questions? All right, so we'll launch into the reading section. You know, again, sometimes we're performing several steps. What do I mean by this? So I'm going to show you where we're going to have a question, a detail, and then there are what they call these command of evidence questions, meaning they're going to ask you what set of lines supports your answer to the previous question. So you're really kind of inferring about relationships in the text, kind of integrating the knowledge, piecing facts and incidents together. And, you know, sometimes these passages have graphics in them where you're going to be asked questions that are going to say, based on the information in the graph and the passage, what is the answer to this question? As I said, the ACT has announced they're moving closer to this, but we do not yet have tremendous information on this or how many of the questions are going to go there. Right now, the ACT, again, is looking for you to find specific information, understand the order of events, cause and effect relationships, and sometimes making comparisons, meaning they'll give you a paired passage, so two passages on the same subject, and they'll ask you to compare and contrast information from those passages. And again, here is a snapshot. I kind of gave you that larger shot before, but specifically showing that the pacing on the ACT is faster. The SAT on the reading, and I'm going to just point you right here, does have 5 passages. Okay. The ACT always has 4 passages with 10 questions. And they're always in this order. There's a literary narrative passage, a social science passage, a humanities passage, and a natural science. One of these passages can be 2 passages about the same subject, or otherwise known as the paired passages. The SAT reading charts and graphs, again, the ACT has indicated they may start putting some of these charts and graphs in the reading, writing, and math sections. But right now, the SAT definitely will do that. This focuses on data analysis. You can see the data presented in the chart, and it is asking students to look from both the passage and the infographic to cull information. So when here's a little tip on education, when we have students see that there's a passage, a chart, We tell them to always look at the title, look at the information, the description up here, and get some general idea of the y-axis and the x-axis here, so that they have an idea of what the chart is about. We don't want them to get too deeply involved because we know 90% of the information they will not need. And when, timing becomes an issue, it's really important. So this is an example of the command of evidence questions that I was talking about before. So we have something where we're asking why the author characterizes certain lines. And again, both descriptions, both descriptive words have to work. And then we ask which choice provides the best evidence for this previous question. So we're looking for statistical evidence. We're looking for research. We're looking for a very clear example. We're looking for an expert who is weighing in to support the answer in the previous question. And they do become challenging. I went through this before, but again, I just wanted to reiterate for you that we are seeing changes in the reading session and the ACT is moving a little bit closer. All right, so the bottom line at the end of the day, the SAT they're both fundamentally similar, but the pacing and the is much more aggressive on the ACT. And right now the SAT includes many more charts, graphs, and paired questions than the ACT does. All right, I know that's a lot to digest. Do we have any questions so far that people would like to ask? All right, so the writing section, again, fundamentally similar. They're both testing punctuation, style, and tone of the writing. They're asking you questions about how the writing passages are organized and developed. The exact style and format of the questions looks exactly the same. There are some nuances of difference, though. One, of course, is the timing, 48 seconds per question, 36 seconds per question. The SAT at this point does include more charts and graphs, very similar again to the writing. They can include this on the writing section as well. So here is an example of a writing section that you might find on both the SAT and the ACT. Okay, so we have a passage, we have numbers and underlines under a question. The first one is involving tenses. What tense would be the correct tense to put in the sentence? The second one talks about our transition words and our conjunctions. So we know is could be a continuation, cause and effect relationship, but means we're doing a 180-degree turn. Thus, of course, we're drawing a conclusion. 3 also is the right format of the verb. Number 4, though, I really want to point out, because this just shows you, especially with the parents on the call, how challenging some of these questions can be. So the students are asked, the writer is considering removing the preceding sentence. Should the writer do it? Not only does the student have to decide yes or no, but they have to decide what is the correct reason why. So this is the portion where I try to garner some sympathy from parents for students on what they have to do. The tests aren't 100% identical, but they're pretty darn close. The SAT tests content a little bit more, so they may ask, what is the most precise language inserting sentences, removing sentences, the organization of sentences within a paragraph. The ACT will test a little bit more of the grammar. So subject-verb agreement, pronoun clarity, punctuation marks. Those are some of the things that are tested. And again, the SAT is a little heavier on the content, but they're pretty close. And when we're going over it, we really do, sorry, I hit the wrong key there. We really do go over virtually the same content. The names are slightly different. And again, some of the charts and graphs which you may see on the ACT, you will definitely see them on the SAT. Any questions at this point? All right. Oops. Sorry, guys, keep hitting the wrong arrow. The science section. Now, this is ACT specific. The SAT integrates it through their math, reading, and writing tests. And they ask students to consider data and graphics along with the information and to synthesize that information. These issues are grounded in science, so they're going to be on scientific topics. The ACT does have a dedicated science section, and it is a lot more detailed than the SAT. So if science is your strength area, or you're interested in going into a science field, you may want to consider the ACT. You can certainly get into science programs taking the SAT, so I don't want anyone to feel that they have to take the SAT, but it may showcase your strengths. So there's going to be more detail on the types of questions, which I'm going to get into in a minute, and more critically examine those relationships and the conclusions drawn on the basis of specific science, research, or science studies. And you're asked to use sometimes multiple charts to, and much more detail than the SAT to get to the answers or to make predictions. So the three types of questions. We have data representation. So again, looking at charts and graphs and calling out information. We have research summaries. So we'll have 2 experiments and the summaries of those experiments, or we'll have a set of data and 3 different interpretations by 3 different researchers. So this is an example of your standard data representation question. You're given the experiment and then you're shown a graph. And much like I pointed with the SAT, we always ask students to look at the y-axis, the x-axis, and get some idea of the direction. So we see that we have a rising slope here, a positive slope. So again, that may help you as you go through the specific questions, understand what you're looking for. Also look at the units of measurement. It's very, very important. With the research summaries, we see we have study 1, study 2, and then we have data offered on a chart. And students may be asked to compare the 2 charts, contrast the 2 charts, or just focus in on one chart and explain how some of the data is used and interpreted. And then we have conflicting viewpoints. So we have some data, and then we have 3 different hypotheses on that data. And again, students will be able to ask to consider the information and then discuss and answer questions based on that. And this is the last section of the test. So, you have to consider also, if science is your strength, that's great. But if it's not, then, it's going to be toward the ends of the test when you probably won't be at your peak in terms of focus and energy. So again, all these things need to be taken into consideration. So in summary, It doesn't test science directly, the SAT. No science knowledge is specifically needed. The ACT does assume that students have some basic science knowledge. What we do find is the foundations on that can help students with the background, but it's very important to remember that the answers to the questions must come from what's in the passage. And this is very different from what we do in school. School, you take a test and you answer for what's in your head. On the ACT, you must be able to point to the information from the passage to ensure you're getting the information from there. Any questions so far? All right, so let's get into what I think many of you have questions on, the test optional. Now, I know we don't have specifically, do we have any 12th graders that are on the call?
I am.
You are, okay. Thank you, Jackie. So this is what's going for 2022, Jackie. So this is your class. Things may be considered. I know we have a few 11th graders here and 10th graders. So we will see how this plays out in the coming year. Of course, this is a very fluid situation because of the situation with COVID. Right now, these are two schools that I'm illustrating for you. So Cornell University, and this is taken right from their websites as of late last week, does expect to require the SAT in the future, or the ACT. But for 2022, you can submit your applications for early and regular decision, or early action and regular decision, early decision and regular decision. If you have some questions on that, be happy to answer those, with or without test scores. How are they going to evaluate you if you don't have test scores? And this is the exact language which I quoted to let you know exactly what they're putting out to students and guidance counselors. You always want to put yourself in the best light. So you want to present information that is going to do that with you. And if your test scores are strong, certainly that is something that you may want to consider. Also drill down and look at specific colleges. So for example, with Cornell, the College of Architecture will not consider test scores, while the College of Engineering will consider them. So keep that in mind, and this is really where the nitty-gritty research and the questioning begins. Don't necessarily accept it on a website. Everyone is so busy that sometimes the websites do not get updated as quickly as we would like. If you have a question, email the college, call the college, and ask. Colleges love to see questions from students. Do they entertain questions from parents? Absolutely. But they are admitting the students, and they want to see students to be proactive in answering questions. With Harvard, they test optional for 2022. They also do expect to require the SAT and the ACT in the future. And their phrasing is a little bit different, but it essentially says the same. Send whatever materials you believe would convey your accomplishments in secondary school and the promise for the future. Harvard is a little bit different though. If you don't submit your SAT or ACT scores with your application, so for students in the class of 2022, they're working on them now. Many of them will start at submitting them from October 15th all the way through next February. If you don't submit them, they strongly suggest you do take them later on and submit them before you arrive at Harvard, because it is used for academic counseling, placement, and institutional research. Many schools also consider SAT and ACT scores when considering scholarships. So it's not just getting in, it's setting yourself up for scholarship money. It's also sometimes used for class placement. So just keep that in mind going forward. So, many of the schools were test optional for the class of 2021, but we looked at a lot of the data. And a lot of the data showed us that, at least here's an example of University of Pennsylvania UPenn early decision. Those students who did not submit test scores, 9.5% were admitted. If you did submit a test score, 18.4% were submitted with test scores. So there is documentary evidence with many schools that the test scores really do aid in assistance with acceptance to the very selective schools. And here's another example, and this was pre-COVID. University of Chicago decided to go test optional, but 85 to 90% of admitted applicants still submitted test scores. So if you got your heart set and your goals, your dreams, schools are either tier 1, tier 2, Ivy League schools, or very competitive schools. Definitely do your research, but you may want to seriously consider taking one of these tests, even if the school says test optional. In addition to the tests we saw last year, and a lot of this may be attributed to the fact that many schools went test optional because it was very difficult for students to sit for the SAT and the ACT, constantly canceled because of COVID. And all the schools say is no one should jeopardize their health to take a standardized test. We did see a huge increase in applications. MIT saw a 66% increase, but the admit rate fell to 7%. I put the information, the sources for this. Emory's admit rate fell from 19 to 13%, and Virginia Tech saw an increase of 36% in applications. And I, told you that Harvard had well over 60,000 applications. So again, keep that in mind. With that going forward, it'll be interesting to see if that continues for 2022 and beyond. But right now, many students applied to many more schools because they didn't have to submit test scores and they felt, what have I got to lose? I mean, it's expensive for these applications, but what do I have to lose? I'm going to apply and see what happens. So which test is right for you? Again, kind of reprising some of the things that we've talked about. Another one presented a little differently that just focuses on the concepts, and the big key difference is still the math and the fact that the ACT has a dedicated science section, and the pacing. We're often asked, does the colleges prefer one over the other? Very, very few prefer one over the other. There are some small liberal arts colleges that seem to favor the ACT over the SAT, but definitely check with your individual school. Most schools do not have a preference. Most schools do the Superscoring. And there are concordance tables. So if you get a certain score in the SAT and you're wondering how that matches up with the ACT, you can look at this table and then you can evaluate whether the scores are similar or you seem to have a strength area and seem to do better on one or the other. Okay. I also put a link down here. We do offer practice tests and consultations for families because you decided to join us tonight. There's usually a $60 fee for that. You have the option, if you would like, of joining us for a free practice test, either in person at our Jericho Center, conveniently located in the Whole Foods Shopping Center, or to do it virtually. I put the link on there so that you could register for it. I also put the link in the chat if you'd like to do that as well. And this would give you a chance to take an SAT or an ACT and see what your comfort level is on it. We run it the same way we would run, you would run as you take a test in actuality. So we do the timing the same way, the rules the same way, the calculator, no calculator, only being able to use a pencil, etc. with that. So if you'd like to take advantage of that, just cut and paste that link, or you can go in the chat and get it, and be happy to work with you on that. Okay. So how else can we help? This is the email address of your local center. That is the phone number. Excuse me, if you just wanted to sign up for a practice test and you didn't want to go through the form, you could certainly call us at that center and speak with Dan Lee, our center director, or Christine Bahari, and our education coordinator, and they would be most happy to help you. And I have that here, another link with that. All right, so just a little bit about C2, and then we'll open it up for questions. What separates us from many other providers? We really sit down with you and spend the time to get to know you, get to know what your goals are, and put together a comprehensive plan to help you develop the skills that you need to be successful. So we really, again, takes about an hour. We take that opportunity and that time for you and customize a program based on your needs. A student who's in 8th grade who may need some help with specific subjects or has some concerns with reading is going to be a very different program from, a student who is in 11th grade getting ready for the SAT, the ACT, maybe taking both, and then needs some support for AP classes. Very different from a senior that just may need a little help with their AP classes, done with the SAT and the ACT, but really needs help writing those college admissions essays, which really have taken on almost a new level because the lack of the SATs and the ACTs. It really is a window into who you are as a person and why the school, how the school can evaluate you, whether you be a good fit to be on their campuses. Our tutors are all college graduates. We know some, entities use students that aren't college graduates yet. We feel it's important, and they all test and have to be in the top 5% on the tests and the subjects that they teach. And then they're evaluated, and we do personal development all the time. Okay. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to, we can open up the floor. I'm just going to close the chat so that I can see everybody. If you would like to open up your mic and ask any questions, I'm happy to entertain those.
So what is a good ACT score for colleges like Ivy Leagues?
All right, so if you're going for the Ivy League, you want to get as close to a perfect score as you can. Again, it's very competitive. The range that they generally get is about a 33 to 36 on every section. So that'll kind of give you a general area with it. But again, I would check each individual school's website. And what I mean by school is not just the university itself, but to check the individual colleges, because different colleges sometimes have different requirements or different suggested scores than other requirements, the more competitive programs. So I know in Stony Brook, for example, the STEM programs, the engineering programs are much more competitive and suggest a much higher score than some of the other programs that Stony Brook offers. Good question, Jackie. Very good question. Anyone else?
Is there
Yeah.
ever a reason to take both tests? Because I've heard that you should decide which one is better for your student and then just have them practice that and work towards that one test.
So, it really depends on the student. I'm not hedging the question. The student really has to evaluate. I have two adult children who are in their 20s. I knew with my daughter, who was my academic child, my son is wonderful, but he worked at the subjects he was interested in and the ones he wasn't, not so much. He's great now and he's successful and everything. He's 30 this year. I don't know how that happened, but they keep getting older. Hopefully I don't. But getting back to the tests itself, my daughter had a very hectic schedule in school. She had a lot of AP classes. And given that, we sat down and did an evaluation and felt it would be better for her to focus on one test. And that's what she did. We have other students who, start with us early on and they're really not sure and they want to work on both tests. So we work with them on both tests. It really is the student sitting down and evaluating. What we do suggest is taking both tests. My nephew, who basically scored the same on both the SAT and the ACT, when I asked him how he felt about it, he said, Aunt Mindy, I preferred the ACT. I felt more comfortable on it. I had another student who also scored the same, took the ACT, nicely put it down on my desk and said, I never want to see this test again. I'm more comfortable with the SAT. So the answer is, Pam, it is dependent on the student, but we would encourage taking both so the student can experience and then seeing which test they are more comfortable with. Now, I did allude to, timing, the fast-paced timing. I did allude to the fact that you can get extended time if you have a 504 or an IEP or anything like that. Each test, the SAT and the ACT, have different procedures for getting accommodations. Do not wait to the last minute. Most of these entities need about 3 months to process. It has to go through the guidance counselors. Given COVID, I would allow even more time than that. I would say about 6 months to apply. Now, if you apply for the PSAT, it will carry through the SAT. The ACT, you have to apply for every time you want to take the test. So if you get it for the first one and you did it 6 months before, the renewal of it may be easier, but you can't assume because you had it on the February test that you're going to have it again for April. So just keep that in mind as well. If anyone, has students that get accommodations, gently remind your guidance counselors that you need help with this. But be pleasantly persistent. I will call you. We've had some situations, unfortunately, where students do get the accommodations, but it's like a week after the test was given, and it creates challenges. So, sometimes you have to submit additional documentation, etc. Pam, I know I added a little bit, but did that initially answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Anyone else have questions here? Kevin, I see your mic is on. Did you want to ask something? Okay, guess not. Okay. All right. Well, I thank you all for your time and your questions and sticking with the program. If you do have any additional questions, we're happy to entertain them. I put up the information, which I will do again, with the phone numbers on it so that you can write that down if you didn't catch it. Right there. So if you do have any questions, you can certainly reach out to us. I'm at the Syosset Jericho Centers as well, via email, via phone, to answer any of those for you. Okay.
And
Anything
you
else?
will to get a recording of this.
yeah, I'm going to just get off of that. Let's change the screen sharing, and I will stop the